Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. I'm your host, depressed alcoholic author getting into fistfights over sentence structure in 1920s Paris, Derek. Joined by my friend and co-host, young Cuban chauffeur at my palatial estate, Tim. How you doing, Tim?
Very confused at why I'm a chauffeur with my driving record, but hey-ho. So how have you been, Derek?
You know, I'm real fucking mad at the weather. I fucking hate with the weather.
How so?
Oh, because it didn't get above like 60 degrees until like the middle of fucking March. And then it got back up to like 80 degrees for like 2 days, and it dropped back down to like 60 degrees for another month. And now we're getting back.
That sounds like Oklahoma for you.
And now we're getting back up into, like, this is going to be a fucking weird... It's going to be a wet summer. It's going to be a real rainy summer this year. And I'm mad about it. Not because I particularly dislike this kind of weather, but just, like, stop being fucking weird. I want my weather to be predictable.
Sounds like we need to reverse global warming.
No. My good friend over at Exxon Mobil told me that everything was actually fine, so we don't need to worry about it.
Sure, believe ExxonMobil.
Yeah, do you not respect their expertise in natural gas and oil? Wouldn't they be the experts?
No, because they're incentivized to fucking make money.
Well, you sound like a stooge for the renewable energy lobby.
I think we shouldn't destroy our planet.
Typical liberal bullshit. Damn. What were we talking about again?
What are you drinking tonight, Derek?
Oh, shit, yeah, what am I drinking tonight? So, tonight, trying to ease my way back into drinking. So I just walked in, George's, my favorite liquor store. Can't really do the liquor thing anymore, but they do have beer as well. So I just walked in, I'm like, hey, get me something good that's local. And he was like, okay, you want an IPA? I was like, no, fucking hate IPAs. It's like, okay, this...
I would have told him, you lost 2 respect points from me.
So he was like, okay, here's the 3 local beers that we have that aren't IPAs.
Jesus Christ, Derek!
So I picked out just a classic lager. It's a Cowboy Cold. It's a 4.2 in a 12-ounce can. And it is made by Lively Beer Works here in Oklahoma City. I think this is my first beer from them. And it's a good...
It's the first time I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's a good... old-fashioned sipping beer. It's a good American lager.
Hell yeah.
Anyway, what the fuck are you drinking, asshole?
So, I'm drinking Juicy Peach from Locust Brewery. And I've had at least, I think, 1 or 2 other beer, ciders from them. And it's a nice, what percent? It's 5% even. And it's so freaking good, you're going to be mad you can't have more.
Yeah, God, it looks so good. Just peach cider, hard peach cider. God, it's like it was made for me. God, I love peach. That's why the peach emoji is my favorite. It has nothing to do with ass.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So we're going a little bit out of our normal repertoire of talking about, generally we talk about like political figures or activists or maybe like generally like people who are influential for like very direct reasons in a lot of cases. Today we're going to be talking about an author, which is kind of weird, but his life, I think a lot of the stories about him are very much over. not that I think I know a lot of the stories about him are very much overblown. Like this guy never bombed Nazi U-boats or, you know, was the first man to walk into a liberated Paris during World War II, like the stories go. Anyways, I think that this guy's story is really, really interesting, not for all of the reasons that people think, but kind of on its own terms. There's a lot of lessons that I think we can take from this guy's life. And it's just really interesting to see kind of, because this we're talking about Ernest Hemingway. We're talking about one of the greatest modernist writers of his generation, and one of the great American writers. One of those authors that like becomes part of like the American cultural canon. Some of his works. I think his story is interesting both because of the actual like real influence that he left behind, and because his life exposes a lot of like the cultural stuff that was going, like the cult, like the stuff that was going on in the cult, like in his sort of corner of history that influenced his writing, has then kind of through the filter of his writing further shaped kind of how we view that time. And I think that that's an interesting story on its own. Plus, like just the guy's biography itself, really interesting, but not in the ways that you'd kind of expect.
Okay.
And I'd just like to say off the bat right now, this guy was kind of a shithead. Hemingway was not.
How many people on our show have not been shitheads?
2. Smedley Butler, and no, never mind. He was absolutely a shithead.
No, he was a shithead. He was a shithead.
He was definitely okay. 1. John Heisman.
He was a shithead in his youth.
How so?
Wasn't he like a dick in like the beginning of college before he became a coach?
Not
like he was just being a hooligan?
Not particularly. I mean, he was just a like a normal guy. Nobody ever said that he was a particular asshole or anything. So, anyways, you wanna go ahead and hop in?
Yeah, let's talk about him.
All right. Ernest Miller Hemingway was born in Oak Park, Illinois on July 21st, 1899. Oak Park is a suburb near Chicago. He was the second of 6 children. His dad was a doctor, and his mom was an opera singer and a music teacher. So he grew up in a pretty affluent, kind of comfortable upbringing. His parents were pretty well off, they're pretty comfortable. Oak Park was kind of one of those communities where people who had like a lot of financial stake in Chicago but didn't actually want to live in Chicago, that's where they went to live. Just to kind of give you an idea. Growing up, Ernest's mom taught him cello, which he did not enjoy. He hated playing cello. And by all accounts, she was a pretty domineering woman. She was very much like the matriarch of the household. She even like ordered dad around, and during a time when like patriarchy was like all the rage, she was still like kind of almost like a stereotypically like domineering, emasculating mother and wife. Very, very, very interesting the way that it's kind of portrayed. It makes me kind of wonder how much of it is actually true. But what we do know for sure is that Ernest fucking hated his mom. Just absolutely despised the woman.
Okay. Sounds like he kind of had a damn good reason.
Yes. Because she was very strict and pretty like emotionally abusive by today's standards. Because she was strict and she had like this obsessive need for her children to excel in. activities that she deemed to be like kind of proper. So like they had to be good in music, they had to be good in like particular fields of education. She wanted him to go and be a doctor like his dad, and very much like tried to force him into that. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to go on road trips and play football. That's what he wanted to do.
Respectable.
As a result, as he got into his teenage years, he and his mom butted heads constantly, and he grew pretty depressed. He was a pretty depressed teenager, which, you know, been there.
I mean, you kind of would inevitably be when you got a parent like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Ernest's first experience with published writing was while he was acting as the editor of his high school newspaper, which is where he wrote mostly sports columns under the pen name Ring Lardner Jr.
That's a weird pen name to have, but okay.
It's because there was a sports writer for a newspaper in Chicago named Ring Lardner, who was pretty prominent at the time, and so he just called himself Lardner Jr.
Okay.
After graduating high school in 1917, he immediately moved away from home. You know, immediately got the fuck out from under his mom, and he moved to
As one should.
Oh yeah, he moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where he started work as a reporter for the Kansas City Star, which is a newspaper. He would be in this position for only 6 months, but this writing style would end up influencing his later prose style. So the way that it was described is that the sort of journalistic approach, it was pretty common at the time, but in particular at the Kansas City Star, the way that they approached it was that they kept their writing style in like their newspaper very constricted. So they didn't use they would try to get as much meaning out of as little words as possible, was the basic concept.
Okay.
And so that's in his first like professional writing gig, that's kind of how he was taught to write, was to keep your sentences short and direct, but pack as much meaning to them as absolutely possible. And you can see that in like his later writing style. When I was in high school, I tried to read A Farewell to Arms, which is one of his novels that he wrote, and I couldn't do it because my frustrated teenage mind was incapable of really like taking in and really comprehending the amount of information that I was getting from, like, there was so much of the...
So what you're saying, he kind of had the opposite thing as Stephen King, because Stephen King like adds so much descriptiveness to his stuff. It kind of, that's like, I enjoy Stephen King's works and his writing style, but at certain points I'm like, okay, you didn't have to describe it in this much of a torturous detail.
Yeah. Hemingway's writing style is kind of the opposite of that. So it's still very
That's what I said. I said the opposite of King.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so it's still very descriptive, but a lot of the description kind of relies on the inferences that you make from the actual information that he's giving you. So it kind of relies on you kind of having an understanding of the context around the words that he's writing, which at the time kind of worked because a lot of the stuff that he wrote about was about like contemporary, like modern, like current events that were happening in the news at the time. And so if you were already familiar with that, you could pick up a lot of the context for the stuff that he was writing. Today, it just comes off as his writing style comes off as really super choppy.
Okay.
And like a bunch of like really brief, direct sentences that don't seem to really explain anything at all, that you have to have the historical context for a lot of the stuff that he's writing.
So obviously, it would be similar to like, yes, it's descriptive in the way they wanted at the time, but like it's the same kind of way that H.P. Lovecraft described his horrors with in the roundabout way. Like
I think Lovecraft was different because he deliberately left information out in order for your mind to kind of.
What I was meaning is like the difference between like how like when we talk about something being incomprehensible today versus back then, I was trying to make like a comparison to how the descriptions today and back then were like.
Okay, I guess I don't understand. Then
It didn't really come across. It's obviously not. You were saying how it was like choppy and blah 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 blah. Well, it doesn't feel like he's really describing or like by modern horror standards, it's not really scary and incomprehensible, and so it's not detailed. In Hemingway's case, it's not as detailed and it comes off choppy because it's relying on its time to do its legwork.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So he left this job after 6 months in late 1917 because what happened in 1917? September of 1917. What was going on at that time?
1970, World War One.
World War One. That is the year that the United States entered World War One, and he wanted to go fight. You know, he was a young man just out of high school. So he went to enlist in the U.S. Army, and they said, "Nope, we're not going to take you." His eyesight was too bad.
Okay.
So instead, he went next door to the Red Cross station, and he volunteered for the Red Cross, and they sent him to Italy to drive ambulance trucks. Because Italy's army at the time, Italy was fighting was on the Entente side during World War One, so they were fighting with France and Britain and the U.S. Italy's military was not modernized enough to have their own motor corps yet.
Wow. Okay.
And so they didn't have when they entered the war, the only ambulances they had were horse-drawn. So the Red Cross stepped in, and basically what they did was that people could go, guys from other countries, from other allied countries could go and volunteer for the Red Cross, and then the Red Cross would train them to be ambulance drivers, and then they would send them over to Italy, where they would be commissioned into the Italian army with an Italian army rank, and their job in the Italian army would be to drive ambulances. And so that's how.
That sounds like a lot of extra steps, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, but it makes sense in the context of like how militaries are organized. It just
I'm not doubting that part. I just mean like that's a whole lot of extra steps.
Yeah. So that's what Hemingway ended up doing. That's how he ended up as a second lieutenant in the Italian army at the age of 18.
Wow.
Yep. And his job was to drive ambulances, which he did.
Did he do it well?
Oh yeah. He was real good at it. Yeah, he was actually awarded.
Damn.
Which I'll get to in a second. Well, I guess technically he wasn't awarded for the ambulance driving, but hold on. On his first day in Italy, he arrives in Milan, which is in northern Italy. His very first job is, like, basically he gets off the plane, he puts his footlocker down at his bed and his bunk on an Italian medical, like Italian military base, and they're like, here's your truck. Go to this munitions factory downtown. The munitions factory blew up.
Oh fuck!
Which it wasn't like sabotaged or bombed or anything. It was just full of explosives, and something sparked and blew up.
And if you have too much explosives, sometimes it can just blow the fuck up.
Yep, and it killed like 150 people.
Oh Jesus!
Which almost all of the victims, because all of the men are in the army. So who's working in the factories?
Ooh. Well, yeah, we knew about this during the Great Wars. Women went to work each time.
Oh yeah. So his very first job, day one upon arriving in Italy, was go to this crater where a munitions plant used to be, and help pick up the body parts of 150 women who were blown to smithereens.
That had to be psychologically damaging.
Well, wouldn't be the last thing that was that psychologically damaged him either. He was a very psychologically damaged man.
I imagine that war damaged a lot of people.
This is that actually is a big topic in a lot of his writing. Is like, he never refers to it explicitly as like mental health or psychological damage or anything like that, but he is, I'll get into this a little bit more later, but he's credited with possibly, not verified for sure, but possibly being the person who invented the phrase the lost generation.
Wow, okay.
Which is the name of the generation that went through World War I. And the idea behind the lost generation being that what you see going into the 1920s is an entire culture of people who survived the greatest cataclysm in human history, and came out the other side with just a completely distorted and fucked up view of like human society, and as a result became very aloof and decadent, and kind of like uncaring about like the world around them, uncaring about like.
So it sets the stage for the collapsing empire that is the U.S. today. What is what you're saying?
I think there's some similarities, but I think specifically in this case, it's referring to like, you know, like the Roaring '20s.
Well, no, what I was meaning is like it's what like what the psychological damage that happened to the silent generation is kind of what caused the destabilization in the bedrock of America that eventually leads to us, is what I was arguing.
I didn't see anything like that. I'd argue that was Reconstruction and the Civil War and Reconstruction that caused that. But,
well, you could argue, like, America's always been on a tightrope and we're finally falling the fuck off.
Absolutely. It was built as a fucked up project. We had an opportunity to fix it in 1865 and we fumbled the ball, and now we're dealing with the consequences. But in this particular case, he was specifically referring, a lot of his generation would kind of look at the Roaring '20s and kind of what society was like becoming. It was a party generation. It was a generation of people that kind of lived life day to day. They didn't really think, they didn't really have a vision of the future. They didn't really want to dwell on the past, because in the past was the fucking trenches.
Yeah.
And like, as a result, a lot of people were kind of like very, you know, there was a big epidemic of people that were just kind of like emotionally stunted by the war. Like an entire generation of emotionally stunted people. And they saw this in their own generation, and they acknowledged it, and they wrote about it. Specifically, though, Hemingway's approach to it was like, these people aren't broken. We're not a broken generation. We're not a lost generation. We haven't lost everything that's redeemable about us because it was like drowned in the mud of no man's land. There's still like humanity here. There's still like goodness, and there's still like passion and things like that. It's just, we've seen what the world of old looked like, and now we're making something new. We have this indomitable passion that's intrinsic to the human spirit, and we're finding new ways to express it. And that was kind of his take on it, was they weren't a lost generation. They were just creating something new out of the ashes of the old. That was kind of his perspective on it. And that's kind of what came through in his writing. I'm going to go into all of this a little bit more later, but I really need to emphasize Hemingway was a lot of things. He was an asshole. He was a cheating bastard. He treated people poorly. But one thing you can never say about him is that he was a pessimist.
Interesting. I would have thought after like the war that would have led to a very easy decision to be pessimistic, but like hats off to him for not leaning into the pessimism.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to see this time and time again in all of the both the best and worst ways. He always saw something better on the horizon. And it led him to it. It's what informed his creative drive, and it's also what kind of drove his ego at the same time. Like, I don't know. It's really complicated. He's a very psychologically complicated guy. But we'll dig into it a little bit more. Yeah.
As a lot of our subjects end up being, that they're all pretty psychologically complicated.
So, a month after arriving in Italy, he's stationed on the front lines in northeast Italy. They're fighting against the Austro-Hungarians, and he's off. He's off his regular ambulance duty for a little bit, and he's taken the day to grab up a whole bunch of crates of chocolate and cigarettes so that he can take them up to the front line and start handing them out to Italian soldiers. You know, just that's part of what the Red Cross does, kind of try to keep morale up and shit like that. While he's up there in the trenches.
Feels weird thinking that we used to just like hand out cigarettes to people because like we didn't think about what the cigarette corporations were keeping cancer from us, but at this time, they probably didn't even know.
Look, if I was in the trenches of World War One,
oh no, you would have earned your cigarettes.
And somebody offered me a cigarette, I would suck their dick. Like, what? No questions asked. Like, absolutely. I need that fucking nicotine. I'm in the fucking trenches of World War One. I need that shit. So while he's up there in the trenches, they start getting hit by Austrian mortar fire. Almost immediately, Ernest is hit with a mortar shell goes off a couple feet away from him on the ground and blasts a shit ton of shrapnel into both of his legs.
Ooh, I bet you that fucked his legs for life.
Man, he gets so many debilitating injuries that just stick with him for the rest of his life. He gets so many injuries, dude. And like not just like small injury, like shit that like cripples him, but anybody else it would cripple them for the rest of their lives. It's fucking wild how often he gets hurt. But despite the fact that his legs were now full of roughly 2 pounds worth of shrapnel,
holy shnikes, Batman!
Oh yeah, he had to. After this, he had to get surgery. He was in the hospital for like 7 months, not able to walk. Like it was like an 18-hour surgery trying to get all the pieces of shrapnel out of his legs.
And this is like early 1900s surgery, so like.
Yeah, this is 1907.
Numbing isn't that great. Yeah, there's not good. You're not going to be like, you might still be awake during this goddamn surgery.
At this point, they did have morphine, so
morphine is nice.
So for what that's worth, they were able to sedate him and put him to sleep. They'd actually had like laughing gas and like sleeping gas for like 80 years at this point.
I thought it was always a chance that you were just given CO2 poisoning at that point, though, back then.
Oh yeah, very much so. Absolutely, there was a real chance they would put you to sleep to go into surgery, and you'd wake up with brain damage from oxygen deprivation. That was absolutely something that happened all the time. But they did have the technology to put you to sleep. It was just that it was about this time where it became economically feasible to do it in the army.
Okay.
Like the army had them, like it was an easy enough process that they could do it like at an industrial scale.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyways, despite the fact that his legs were now full of a shit ton of shrapnel, he managed to pull like 4 or 5 wounded Italian soldiers to safety and like dragged them out of the trench and away from the mortar fire.
You said he wasn't an action hero. That is some action hero shit.
That is some... Okay, yeah, to be fair, that is some action hero shit. He did actually do that.
I will sip to that.
I will absolutely sip to that, yeah. For this, he was awarded 2 medals by the Italian army and was promoted to first lieutenant.
As he goddamn should be. With you earned that.
Mm-hmm. While he was recovering in the hospital, he fell in love and briefly had an affair with a Red Cross nurse by the name of Agnes von Kurowski.
Agnes is just a weird... Excuse me. Agnes is just a weird name for me personally. Like
It's a very old-fashioned name, yeah, but I kind of like it. So when you're Catholic, when you get old enough, you go through this thing called confirmation, which is where you're kind of considered an adult by the church, and you're kind of confirming that you're going to be Catholic when you're going into adulthood.
Yeah.
And when you're confirmed, you have to choose a saint. So when my sister was confirmed, she chose Saint Agnes, who is the patron saint of animals.
Hell yeah.
Mine was Saint Michael. So there's this Red Cross nurse that's working in the hospital where he's convalescing after his legs get fucked up. They briefly date.
Is this where wife number 1 comes in?
No, actually. After the war was over, he returned to the U.S. in 1919, and it was on the understanding that she would finish up her service in the Red Cross, and then she would come to the United States to be with him, and then they would get married in the U.S. After he returned to the U.S., he got a letter from her breaking up with him and saying that she was engaged to an Italian officer.
That sucks.
He was a broken man. Now, I want to point something out here because this is going to be informative going forward.
Okay.
So far in his life, the 2 most important women that have ever been in his life were his emotionally abusive, strict mother, and the first love that he ever had who abandoned him.
Yeah, that would lead for some emotional damage and issues with the relationship further down the line.
He does not treat women well for the rest of his life.
I'm not surprised, especially with the time period.
So, after returning home, he would end up getting a job. He would end up going up to Michigan, where he would write for a Canadian newspaper, the Toronto Star. And while he's there, he would meet a woman named Hadley Richardson. And they would end up getting married in 1921, and they would move to Paris. Because Ernest first of all, she wanted to live in Europe. He wanted to live in Europe. And the Toronto Star was looking for a European correspondent. So he offered to move to Paris to be their correspondent. And that's how they ended up in Paris.
Okay.
As it would happen, Paris was also where all of the most prominent authors of the time were living.
That's weird. That they all just kind of like congregated there?
A big reason for that was because, just like today, there's not a lot of money in writing.
Fair.
And at the time, right after the war, the exchange rate between the U.S. dollar and the French currency, francs, was very beneficial.
Really favorable?
It was very favorable. And so it was, for an American, a dollar, what you could get for $1 in the U.S. would be worth, like, you could get for, like, 10 cents.
Nice.
In the equivalent of 10 cents in Paris. So it was, for a lot of authors at the time, it was dirt cheap. So they would live in Paris, and it also had the benefit of they would be able to live in, like, like be surrounded by other artists so they could like bounce ideas off of one another and kind of edit for one another and things like that. And it helped all of their creative processes. And then they could take their drafts and ship them over to the United States to be published, make all of their money in US dollars, convert them into francs, and it would be worth like 10 times more.
I mean, you can still kind of do that today. It's just a lot harder to do stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The dollar is going down in value.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the dollar, but yes, it.
But yeah, you can still absolutely do that, just depending on what two countries you're talking about. So, while in Paris, he would become acquainted with a number of other of prominent authors of the time, including James Joyce, Ezra Pound, and most importantly to him, Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was the most prominent modernist writer of the time. Today, she's still today one of the most influential modernist writers of her generation. The problem is she helped train Hemingway, and she tutored Hemingway in how to write fiction, and he ended up overshadowing her. So it's kind of a but she's still like very important in like literary history, especially English language literary history. The two ended up becoming close friends. Gertrude would end up actually being godmother to Ernest's first son.
Wow. Okay.
Later on, though, the two of them would have a falling out.
It sounds like I'm not surprised with the way you say he didn't treat women very well.
Yeah, he was probably quite an asshole to her, and she ended up kind of shit talking him when she started writing like biographical works, and he got mad about that and started shit talking her in some of his works, and it kind of devolved from there. So he began writing fiction on the side while he wrote articles for the Toronto Star. One of his first big gigs was he left Paris for a couple months to go and report on the Greco-Turkish War. At the time, there was a war between the newly formed Turkish Republic and the Republic of Greece. And he wrote an article describing the sack of Smyrna, the burning of Smyrna, which is a city in the Adriatic, or not the Adriatic, whatever the fucking sea is there in Greece, the Hellenic Sea, whatever. It's the sea that Greece is in. There's a city called...
You would know better than I would. I am not a geography major.
No, Smyrna is in Anatolia, but it was a Greek majority city that was in Turkey. And it was burned by the Turkish army in basically like a big ethnic cleansing. This was kind of the period of time when Turkey was ethnically cleansing its Greek population.
Ethnic cleansings are gross.
It was very bad. It was not good. This would if you ever heard the name Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk.
I have not, but I'm sure you'll give me the context I need.
Yeah, we'll probably we'll almost definitely do an episode about him eventually. He's kind of considered like he was the first leader of the Republic of Turkey after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And he was a westernizer, he was a modernizer. He did a lot of stuff to help advance like democratic rights and women's rights in Turkey, and also carried out like 5 or 6 different ethnic cleansings. So...
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, if you ever look at a map of like medieval Anatolia, it was all Greek. And then you go to like 1930, there's no more Greeks there anymore. That's why.
Very unfortunate.
Anyways, so that was kind of his first. He personally witnessed the burning of the city of Smyrna. So during that time, he was writing a lot of fiction works. Almost none of these works that he wrote during this time survived.
Okay.
Because He had all of his manuscripts. He was writing like 20 different fiction works during that time. He had all of his manuscripts in a suitcase that his wife was carrying when they went on a trip to northern Italy. She left it at a train station.
Oh, God.
And he never saw it again.
Imagine being the time traveler who grabs those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think, like, he had unfinished copies of, like, 3 of those manuscripts, and they were eventually published, but, like, the other 18 or so were never seen again. He was not happy with this and did not treat his wife very well for her having done this. Hadley, that was her name.
He probably didn't treat her well to begin with, but hey ho.
He never treated any of these women very well. In 1923, the couple moved back to Toronto, where they ended up having their first son, John Hemingway, who later went by Jack. I didn't write it down. They had a really weird nickname for him. Hold on, I'm going to pull it up. They had a ridiculous sounding nickname. Bumby. They called him Bumby.
Bumby? That's fucking weird.
Bumby. Nicknamed Bumby as a toddler by his mother because of his plump teddy bear qualities.
The fuck?
No idea what that means. So, anyways, while they were back in Toronto, he published his first fiction work, which it wasn't a novel. It was a collection. I'll let you guess what it was based on the title of the book. 3 stories and 10 poems.
You overestimate my guessing abilities.
There were 3 short stories and 10 poems that he wrote. That's what was in there. It wasn't a full novel. That was published, and it was moderately successful. It didn't make huge waves, but it had some good reviews, and it sold decently well. He made a decent chunk of money off of it. Ernest and Hadley would move back to Paris with their new son in 1924, and then in 25 he published a collection of short stories called In Our Time, which was his first big hit. And this was like this sold, like this started like showing up in like monthly literature reviews and was like selling really well. This was like his first like I could actually make a career off of fiction writing type things. And it was just a collection of short stories. Around the same time is when he became friends with F. Scott Fitzgerald, who's the guy who wrote the Great Gatsby.
I knew that name sounded familiar, but I didn't remember from where.
Yeah, and Hemingway, because they were friends, Hemingway ended up becoming he was one of the very first people to ever read The Great Gatsby before it was published.
Oh, I bet you that was a low-key flex for him.
The biggest influence, or the biggest thing to come out of it, is that he was like, he loved it. He absolutely loved The Great Gatsby. And he was like...
confession time, I've not read nor seen The Great Gatsby.
It's okay. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. Sometimes it feels like it's kind of full of itself, but
I thought that was the point. I thought it was like making fun of like excess and vanity and shit.
It is, but that's textual. But I'm talking about like just the style of the prose itself can tend to get kind of just full of itself. Just kind of.
I get what you're throwing down. I got you.
It's the bit from Family Guy. It insists upon itself. Anyways, so that reading The Great Gatsby inspires him to be like, I need to write a novel. I need to write something like this. The Sun Also Rises is a story about a group of friends who go on a trip to Spain in order to watch the bullfights. The trip quickly devolves when all of the men present begin fighting over their shared attraction for their friend Brett. Brett is a woman.
That just sounds like a bad time waiting to happen.
Yeah. Brett is engaged to one of these men, but has complicated relationships and affairs with all of the men.
And this is why you don't have a woman in the boys group unless she's one of the boys and no one's dating her.
Yeah. The story and all of the characters in it are based on an actual trip to Spain that he and his friends had taken in 1924.
So what you're saying is this is probably what actually happened.
It is spiritually accurate, yes. Might not be specifically accurate in a lot of details, but every single character in the book maps on almost 100% to individual people in real life who were on that trip. Yeah. And here's where we get into a little bit of the psychology. The character who serves as Ernest's stand-in in the story, it basically like the protagonist who's kind of like Hemingway's self-insert, is a World War I vet who's madly in love with Brett, but is not able to have sex due to an injury that he sustained in the war.
So what you're saying is Hemingway was probably impotent this whole goddamn time.
He was definitely not impotent. That was definitely was not impotent. The way I didn't see this mentioned anywhere, so I could be talking out of my ass, and I also haven't read this book, so take this with a grain of salt, but the way that I read it is that the implication, whether it was conscious or subconscious when he was writing the book, was that his inability to have sex in the book, the injury, is a metaphor for his wife. That is how I read it. That might be completely off the mark. I will eventually read The Sun Also Rises, and I will try to confirm that for sure.
Report back?
Yeah, I'll report back. I'll be on the scene. I'll be our foreign correspondent in Spain for the bullfighting, and I'll find out for sure. But that's how I read it. This book was published in 1926. It was his very first full-length novel. It had pretty good success. It did pretty well as
with how messy the background on that book is. I'm surprised.
So it wasn't like topping any charts or anything at the time, but it had positive reviews. It sold really well, and it did help put his name on the map as kind of like an author to watch during that kind of period. Today, The Sun Also Rises is largely considered by literary scholars to be the Ernest Hemingway's greatest work. Definitely his most influential. It is considered like the archetype of his era of modernist literature. Like the style and the prose have been incredibly impactful on the way that authors after him have. The way I saw it phrased was that whether you like him or hate him, you're writing. If you're an author, your writing is influenced by The Sun Also Rises, either because you're trying to emulate it or you're trying to avoid emulating it.
That sounds like an annoying thing to have happened, but yeah.
So while he was writing the book, he met a woman by the name of Pauline Pfeiffer. Pauline was the daughter of a wealthy Catholic family from Arkansas. They started having an affair.
With how misogynistic he sounds already, I'm not surprised he started an affair.
Yeah. Hadley found out and divorced Ernest.
As you should.
About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, he converted to Catholicism so that he could marry Pauline. And he remained a practicing Catholic for the rest of his life.
That's insane.
So the two honeymooned in southern France, where Ernest, while on the honeymoon, caught anthrax.
What?
Yeah, anthrax is bad.
That's insane!
He's like, he eventually runs out of like modern injuries and modern diseases to catch and starts getting like some medieval shit.
What the hell? Oh my god!
So while he's recovering from it, this is not. You are going to be fucking blown away by the types of shit that he survives. So while he's recovering from anthrax, he wrote another collection of short stories called Men Without Women. I'll just let that title. I haven't read it.
That's some incel type shit.
I don't know if it is actually incel shit because I didn't read. I haven't read the stories in there.
The name just reeks of inceldom, is what I will say.
It might not necessarily be like it's good for men to not have women. It might just be like, what would men be without women? You know, that kind of thing. I don't know, though, because I haven't read the stories, so... He wasn't... Here's the thing. He treated women badly. He wasn't ideologically misogynistic. He was definitely misogynistic, but it wasn't like a core belief of his. He was just a shithead to women.
Fair.
He didn't necessarily, like talk about like thinking that women were lesser or they didn't belong in like public life or any of like that kind of stuff. He just didn't treat women well because he was like psychologically fucked up, which isn't an excuse, but it's like you're not going to see any like explicitly misogynistic writing from him. He never like consciously hated women. It came through a lot in his writing. He didn't exactly write women very well in his books, but it was never like conscious like dehumanization or anything like that. He probably was not like consciously aware of like the way that he viewed women.
Fair, like to be perfectly honest, fair. Like a lot of people aren't aware of their own biases.
Right? Yeah.
And it's really hard to wake up and realize where you're like, even if you're like super self-aware, it's hard to recognize it, but also be able to actualize and fix those things where you know you're falling short. And
right, yeah. And here's the thing. He strikes me as the type of guy who had the ability to become self-aware enough to like work on those worse aspects of himself. He had the ability to it, and I'm sure he could have had the motivation to do it because, as we're going to see later, he did deeply care about like social issues and like values of like egalitarianism and things like that. I just don't think that he ever like was ever just introspective enough. He was never thinking about himself in that way. He was never like examining himself in that way. He was always examining other things and other people.
I feel like examining ourselves in that way is a very modern perspective, though. Like, in like because you don't see a lot of people trying to actively seek out their shortcomings to correct them in that way until recently, even, and you still don't see it a whole lot even now.
Yeah, not necessarily, but like I think because even at the time, like I guess I'll just throw out spoilers right now. He eventually becomes a Marxist. And at this time, even at this time, a lot of Marxists were starting to like consciously push forward the idea like in order to push forward the revolution, we need to fix the shit that's kind of ingrained into us by this horrible society. Like that was a very common thing. You gotta kill the boss in your head. You gotta kill the cop in your head.
You gotta unfuck your head.
And a lot of women in the Marxist movement at the time were like, you gotta kill the misogynist in your head. Like that was a common thing that was talked about at the time. So he would have been exposed to like these ideas of self-criticism. You know, that's a very, very common Marxist thing, like ruthless criticism of all that exists, including yourself. It wasn't necessary to the level like you'd get later on with like critical theory. Like you'd get when critical theory starts becoming a thing, and you start like getting like an actual psychological analysis of like how these biases are kind of come about. You don't necessarily have that depth of it, but people at the time were consciously like, yeah, you if you want to fix fucked up shit in society, you gotta fix the fucked up shit in your own head too.
All I can say is preach.
Yeah. And it's all, but Hemingway, just like so many other fucking white dudes in every left-wing movement throughout all of history, just failed to do that.
Not even surprised, just disappointed.
Yeah. So after recovering from anthrax, finishing up their honeymoon, Pauline told him that she wanted to move back to America. She was missing the United States. She just wanted to go back home. And he was like, yeah, that'd be a good idea. I think it's time to go back to the U.S. Before they left, though, Hemingway suffered a head injury. He suffered...
How bad a head injury?
Bad enough that he needed like 20-something stitches and had a concussion.
Jesus Christ.
He suffered it on the toilet.
Christ almighty.
So he finished up on the toilet. And you know those old-fashioned toilets, the way that they flush was they had that chain next to that was like dangling down next to you, and you'd pull the chain and that would flush it. So he was taking a shit in the dark. And after he was done, while he was still sitting on the toilet, he went up to grab it so that he could pull it and flush it. He accidentally grabbed the pole tail for the skylight in the bathroom.
And did it fall on his head?
It pulled it loose, and it fell down on its hinge and smacked him full speed right in the forehead. And so if you see any picture of Hemingway after 1928, you'll notice on his forehead is a very distinct scar just going right across the top. And for the rest of his life, whenever people would ask him, how did you get that scar? He would refuse to speak. Not just refuse to speak about it, would just stop talking.
I probably wouldn't want to talk about it either.
Yeah, no. Because you know what I would do in that situation? I'd be like, that one's not interesting. How about I tell you about these scars on my legs from the 2 pounds of shrapnel that I got hit with when I was in Italy during the war?
Yeah, I would probably go with that.
So, after returning to the U.S., he and Pauline had a son, who they named Patrick.
So this is his second child?
This is his second child with his second wife. Or his second child total, his first one with his second wife. And they settled down in Key West, Florida.
Ew.
That's the intersection of Jimmy Buffett and Ernest Hemingway.
Key West is just like a really shitty, toxic place, to be honest.
Well, that's
Florida.
Also, during this time, his father commits suicide right after they get back to the U.S. And this is, at the time, this was very tragic. Historians and scholars have looked back on it like, that's interesting. Because, spoiler alerts, Hemingway is also going to die by suicide.
Damn.
At around the same age that his dad was.
That is very suspicious.
And 2 of his brothers are also going to die by suicide around the same age.
That's even more fucking suspicious.
So I'll try to get into it a little bit when we get closer to the end, but it's very likely that they all had like a genetic degenerative neurological disease. It's very likely. They've never been able to confirm it, but it's very likely.
I mean, that would explain it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so around this time, his dad dies, and and I'm pretty sure I wasn't able to confirm this for sure, but I'm pretty sure his dad's funeral is the last time he ever speaks to his mom.
I am surprised he even spoke to her then.
Yeah. So after settling down in Key West, he gets to work on his next novel and eventually publishes it in 1929. A Farewell to Arms is a story set in Italy during World War One.
I apologize for the brief interruption. The only exposure I have to that book is the Family Guy bit where the doctor's like, this should explain everything, and it's a farewell to arms. And he's like, I was a nurse who fell in love with Walter. There's no way you read that. And I'm not a big, I don't really like Family Guy, but like, there's some clips out there from it that just like, I die laughing every time I see him, and that one's one of them.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, there's like out of every season, there's like one or two jokes that just really fucking land. like the one where just the line where Peter's like, "Who the fuck starts a conversation like that? I just sat down."
Peter, the horse is here.
Peter, the horse is here.
I like they've got a lot of they got a lot of clippable moments because it's been going on for so damn long is the main reason.
So, A Farewell to Arms is a story set in Italy during World War One, in which an American ambulance driver has an affair with a Red Cross nurse.
So it was a self-insert? Is that what you're saying? He wrote a real-life fanfic.
He wrote about the things that he knew. This book received significantly more success and pretty well. A Farewell to Arms is pretty well what cemented him as kind of like the legendary author that we know today. This was like now that A Farewell to Arms is out, he is now like one of the great writers of American history. In 1931, Ernest and Pauline had their second child together. They named their child Gregory.
I love our boy Greg, but Gregory is just a weird name.
Their child would transition when she's in her 30s and would go by Gloria.
Oh. Hell yeah. We stand on Gloria.
Yeah. She would spend her early adulthood as a physician, but eventually her alcoholism would result in her losing her medical license. So she spent the rest of her adulthood as a writer. So, yeah, I'm interested to read some of her stuff. I bet a trans Hemingway has to have some really interesting perspectives on a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, all through the 30s, Hemingway continued to write short stories and a few biographical works and like reporting and things, mainly on just like he'd just go and spend a couple months somewhere around the world and just write about it and publish it, and they'd always do pretty well.
That sounds like the life, though. Like, being able to travel the world writing and do... Like, I wish we lived in an economy where we could do that.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that he wrote about was stuff in the Caribbean, because he lived in Key West, so he just bought a boat and wrote it off as a business expense and would go on, like, weeks-long fishing trips, and then when he'd get home, he'd write an article about it and publish it. And make some money off of it. And like that was a big chunk of his income during this time, was just going on fishing trips and then writing about it. So he wrote his next novel, published in 1938. It was called To Have and Have Not. This novel
Sounds pretentious as fuck.
Kind of. This novel is credited with popularizing the terms haves and have-nots to describe rich and poor people.
Did he, like... I'm sure it existed, but did he popularize that terminology, I'm guessing?
Yeah. Yeah, this... this is the second popular phrase that he popularized through his writing, haves and have-nots, and the lost generation.
That's insane to have, like, two major, like, day-to-day things like that, and then...
Oh, wait till we talk about Shakespeare. He invented, like, half of the modern English language. To Have and Have Not is a story about a fisherman in Florida who turns to a life of crime after being fired by his rich boss. And the book is noted for its very obvious, heavy influence by Marxism. There's a very obvious Marxist influence in this book, which was not there in his previous works. So that kind of came out of left field, didn't it?
A little bit.
Suddenly, out of nowhere, he's a Marxist. Where did that come from? Well, in 1937, Hemingway loved Spain. He took a lot of trips to Spain. So he'd been following what was going on in the news in Spain during that time. And in 1936, some forces of the Spanish army attempt to march on Madrid and overthrow the legislature of the Spanish Republic. They are pushed back by a coalition of left-wing Marxist and anarchist militias. And this sparks off the Spanish Civil War between the nationalist forces and the left-wing Republican forces.
That not good.
So in 1937, he decides to... He goes and joins kind of this organization of journalists called the North American Newspaper Alliance, and becomes a correspondent for the organization. And he leaves for Spain in February of 1937. So kind of like just about 6 months after the war began. He attached himself to a number of different Republican units, including the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Have you ever heard of the Lincoln Brigade?
No.
The Lincoln Brigade are so fucking cool. I might do an episode about just the Lincoln Brigade sometime, because holy shit, they're so cool. They were a group of American communists, anarchists, and labor unionists that went to Spain and volunteered to fight for the Republican forces during the Spanish Civil War. And they called their unit the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And they have kind of gone down in history as like kind of a tragic story about like these people from like the poorest dregs of like modern industrial capitalist society going off to fight in a war internationally for their fellow workers in a completely different land, to fight for the freedom and liberation of the working people and sacrifice themselves for what was ultimately a doomed cause. And it's a very tragic and there's a lot of mythology and a lot of myth making around it, a lot of exaggerations.
Of course.
They had their problems, just like every unit in the Republican forces in Spain during that time had. But their story is genuinely very heroic and very inspiring. It's a very, very cool story.
Hell yeah.
I'd love to talk about sometime. Kind of in the same vein as like the San Patricios. I kind of see them as like kind of, I think there's a lineage there.
Okay.
And they weren't the only one. There were units made up of foreign volunteers from England, Germany, France, Russia, just all over the place. I think there were Japanese volunteers. There were like Japanese communists that had been exiled from Imperial Japan and had gone to fight in Spain for the Republican cause. It was really, really cool stories.
That's sick.
Yeah, they're kind of what got me interested in like the idea of like foreign volunteers to like modern military, like modern war. In modern war, there's this trend in almost every war you see in the modern era of people from around the world for ideological reasons going to this completely new country they've never been to before and fighting on behalf of a cause that is not necessarily theirs but that they believe so strongly in. And it's just the most fascinating thing. I mean, even just like today in our lifetimes, like the Western foreign volunteers that went and fought in the YPG, the Kurdish militia in northern Syria during the Syrian civil war. A lot of them came home with like tattoos of the international brigades, the Spanish international brigades, like symbol, like tattooed on them because they considered themselves kind of in that same vein. It's a very, very interesting history. Well, like kind of one of my historical special interests. Anyways, Hemingway ends up spending quite a bit of time with the Lincoln Brigade and does a lot of like basically just talking to these guys, and all of these guys are like very committed Marxists and experienced like union like labor organizers, and basically gets like an in the field on the battlefield crash course in Marxist theory. And by the time he leaves Spain, he is a dedicated Marxist.
Hell yeah.
Like he believes in it wholeheartedly. He ended up being present at the Battle of Ebro. The Battle of Ebro was the last stand of the Republican forces.
Ooh.
After this, the Republican armies would be basically like there'd be a little bit of resistance for a few months after, but by the following year, 1939, Francisco Franco would be in complete control of Spain, and Spain would remain a fascist dictatorship up until the 1970s.
Fuck!
Did you know that?
No.
Spain didn't reintroduce anything resembling a democratic system until Reagan was running for president.
Fucking hell. Reagan really was evil if they had to bring back that shit.
Well, it was just a coincidence. It happened that during that time was when Franco finally died.
Don't ruin my parade. I like demonizing Reagan.
So, he was present for the final defeat of the Republican forces in the Spanish Civil War. When it became clear that the Republicans were going to lose and their position was going to be overrun by nationalist forces, he and all of the other American journalists that were there tried to flee, but then they realized that the last bridge out, had been destroyed by artillery fire.
Ooh.
And so they were forced to cross the Ebro River on a rickety, leaking rowboat while mortar and artillery shells were popping in the water all around them. And Hemingway was just fucking
mad,
fucking rowing for his goddamn life. So he gets the fuck out of Spain before the nationalists take complete power. He returns to the U.S., and this is when he starts drinking.
He's only just now drinking. Oh, lovely.
Yeah, you can imagine what his personality gets like when he's drunk.
Belligerent, drunk asshole, as we all assume.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, I didn't see any indication that he was ever like physically abusive to anybody. But he was definitely like extremely emotionally abusive to people in his life, especially when he drank.
I think you're giving him a little bit too much credit because a lot of the domestic violence back then was you just shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Everything else I know about him and the archetype that he's like from, and this is just me being biased, obviously, sounds like he probably would likely have been.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if he beat his wives. I just didn't see any accounts that he ever had.
We cannot back up that account.
Right, yeah. His wives did talk about their relationships with him after like leaving him. So and they were never sparing. They were never gentle about it. They were very clear about what kind of man he was in their relationships. They just never mentioned like him being physically abusive. So that's why I kind of lean towards like he probably never smacked them around, but definitely was just a real emotionally drained, just emotional vampire of the highest tier.
Fair enough.
So, understandably, this combined with the fact that his most recent book, To Have and Have Not, was largely a critical flop. It didn't sell very well. He got a lot of negative reviews.
Rip.
He started drinking pretty heavily and started more and more mistreating Pauline. And pretty soon their relationship had deteriorated to the point where he just kind of left. He got on his boat and he sailed to Havana. And when he got to Cuba, he bought a villa, like an old plantation villa.
Damn.
Outside of Havana, and moved in with a woman he'd met in Spain named Martha Gellhorn.
This is woman 4?
This is going to be his third wife.
Wife 3, woman 4.
Woman 4, yeah. Yeah. So he and Pauline would divorce in 1940, and then he married Martha the same year. That same year, 1940, he publishes his next novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls.
I've heard that title. I've never read it.
Yep. This is a book about an American volunteer in a Spanish Republican guerrilla unit during the Spanish Civil War. The book was hugely successful. It sold really, really well. It sold so well that it caught the attention of the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Oh, shit!
And because because the book explicitly glorified and valorized the Marxist guerrilla fighters of Spain, they didn't outright ban it or anything, but they did ban it from being able to be mailed through the postal service.
Nah, that's just a cuck move.
Yeah, real shitty. Also, it was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and to this day, For Whom the Bell Tolls is the only book to ever receive a unanimous vote by the Pulitzer Committee to receive the prize.
Damn!
The prize was blocked.
Oh!
Somebody who had oversight on the committee who didn't like communists blocked the award. So it did not receive the Pulitzer Prize, despite being the only novel in the history of the Pulitzer Prize to receive unanimous vote.
Oh God, I would be so pissed.
Yeah. I think it's been retroactively given back because that year, the 1940 Pulitzer Prize, because it was a unanimous vote, there were no runner-ups. And so they couldn't give the award to another book. And so there just wasn't an award for a Pulitzer for novels given out that year. And so I need to look it up again, but I think it was I think a few decades later it was retroactively given to the book. But yeah, at the time, like they blocked it from getting the Pulitzer, which is fucking crazy. So, the U.S. entered World War II in 1941 after... Do we know our history? Oh, God.
Derek, you know I'm not a history person.
What was the event that resulted in the United States joining the Second World War?
Pearl Harbor.
It was Pearl Harbor. Yes. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure some of my lessons had stuck.
Well, I knew about Pearl Harbor. You're forgetting, like, I know a decent amount of history. It's just being able to connect the dots, because it for me, a lot of history knowledge is like not necessarily like individual fact based, but like it's compartmentalized. A lot of like my brain, it's like knowing that telegrams, cowboys, and shogun and the samurai were all happening at the same time, but no one would have fucking know. Like, that's one of the schisms where you're like, hey, that doesn't sound like it should be happening, but hey ho.
Yeah. So the U.S. entered World War II in 1941, and Hemingway, being a hardcore Marxist, was deeply anti-fascist, especially after seeing what the fascists had done to all of these people that he liked in Spain. So, this is where we get to the myth of him bombing U-boats. He did not bomb U-boats because he never got the opportunity.
But he would have.
He would have. What he did was he set up his fishing boat. He converted it from a fishing boat into a Q-boat, which a Q-boat was a model of boat that there's a general term for a model of boat that was basically like a civilian boat that was refitted in order to act as a lookout, basically like a patrol boat looking out for submarines. He, without permission from the U.S. government, refitted his fishing boat into a Q-boat and went out to patrol the Caribbean looking for U-boats with bombs on his boat, with depth charges that he made himself, ready to drop them in the water if he ever saw a U-boat. He never did.
So what you're saying is he was going to bomb the Nazis if he found them, but he didn't get the chance.
Oh, don't worry, he will bomb some Nazis. He just didn't in this case. We're getting there, though. This is honestly a crazy... What's coming up is a crazier part of the story that I'm shocked the U-boat thing is what stuck with his legend that people know about, because what's coming up is fucking way crazier. It actually happened.
Okay.
Also, that was part of what he was doing. He spent more of his time in Havana, basically building like a spy network in Havana. Like an impromptu spy network. This was not...
I think I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, this was not under the authority of anything in the U.S. government or the U.S. military. He just did this himself. He got a bunch of informants to basically, like, look out for any Francoists. Because there were, like, Francoist sympathizers in Spain, and he thought that they might be, like, passing along information to the Nazis. So he basically set up a spy ring as like a counterintelligence operation to prevent any fascist spies from passing on information.
That's dope.
I don't know if he ever caught any, but he did it. And he definitely did it. And because all of this was...
I feel like that if he did succeed, it's not something that probably would have gone down in the history records unless he brought it up.
Yeah. Because he was doing this all unsanctioned without permission from the U.S. government, the FBI was keeping an eye on him. Also, they were keeping an eye on pretty much every American that went over to Spain during the Civil War because, they spy on communists. That's what the FBI exists for.
I mean, the FBI spies on whoever the fuck they want, even today. They're probably listening to our recording right now. Hey, FBI agent.
Oh, yeah. So, not necessarily, like... They weren't, like, concerned about him, but they were keeping an eye on him. It came out after he died that the FBI did actually have a file on him from this period of time. It was about 143 pages long. Which... If you know anything about, like, FBI files on, like, dissidents that they spied on...
That's kind of small.
That's pretty small. Martin
Luther King's was, like, thousands long, wasn't it?
Tens of thousands. MLK had an FBI file that was tens of thousands of pages long. It probably was bigger. They probably didn't release all of it.
Well, they actively tried to kill him. They actively tried to kill him.
Well, they actively succeeded in killing him. I'm fully convinced that they killed they killed MLK.
I couldn't remember if it was the FBI or if it was other forces that just so happened to align with the FBI's desires at the time. But yeah.
So during the war, he began to drink even more heavily. I'm going to say that a lot. He began to drink more heavily than he previously had been, and became more and more verbally abusive to his now wife. He had divorced his last wife and married this lady, Martha. She would eventually get sick of his bullshit, and she was a journalist too, so she just went over to Europe and started acting as a war correspondent. Because dodging Nazi bullets seemed better to her than spending any more time with this drunk asshole.
Smart! Crazy, but smart.
Yeah. So eventually, Hemingway was like, I can't be cooped up in Havana any longer. I need to go out and actually see the war. So he got work he basically went out as like an independent correspondent, kind of. Just kind of like going. He got a press pass for himself without being connected to like any major publication. And because he was Ernest Hemingway, the great author, they were like, okay, yeah, sure, we can let you attach to one of our units. So he shows in 1944. He shows up to London. Almost as soon as he gets there, he starts an affair with a Time magazine correspondent named Mary Walsh.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't know why she didn't just divorce him, because it sounds like the marriage was over as soon as she like fucked off.
It's pretty much over at this point. So right after he got to London, Martha had actually been back in Havana, getting some stuff published that she'd been writing about, and then she needed to go back to London so that she could continue her correspondence work. So she reached out to Ernest to be like, hey, since you're already over there and you're, Ernest Hemingway, do you think you could get me a pass, basically like a press pass, to get me on a like a destroyer or something that's crossing the Atlantic over to England, just so I don't have to go on like a transport boat full of explosive munitions through U-boat infested waters. You think you could do that for me, my husband?
Yeah, the relationship was definitely over.
He just ignored her, and so she was forced to cross the Atlantic through U-boat infested waters on a ship containing thousands of tons of explosive munitions. While she was on the ship, he got into an awful car wreck that almost killed him, and he spent a month in the hospital. He was still bedridden in the hospital when she showed up in London, found out that he was in the hospital, went to the hospital where he was staying, and said, I don't give a shit that you almost died. Fuck you, I'm divorcing you.
Surprised it took her that long, but...
And so their divorce would finally be finalized in 1945, and then he would end up later marrying Mary Walsh.
Not surprised.
And this car accident that he was in London, he got a severe concussion and a head wound that required 57 stitches.
Another head wound?
Oh, yeah. This is not his last one either.
Jesus Christ, this man's IQ is taking a beating.
Yeah, like every couple years he gets an injury that just knocks like 5 IQ out of his ears. And against he probably should have been convalescing for like several months. In less than a month, he just leaves the hospital against doctor recommendations while he still has a...
So what you're saying is Hemingway was built fucking different?
Kind of, yeah. He was a tough dude. Especially this part. He still has his bandages on.
By all rights, this man should have still been, like, bedbound, like, not physically able to get up.
By this point, a lot of people would have just died a long time ago.
Yeah.
And this is the crazy shit. He left the hospital because he didn't want to miss his next assignment. He was attached to the American forces landing on Omaha Beach. He was in a Higgins boat on Omaha Beach. Why do we not talk about this shit? When he was on this boat, they didn't allow journalists onto the beach on D-Day, but he was in a boat in the water watching the D-Day landings. Several artillery shells landed within feet of the boat that he was in. And all of this while he had just less than 3 weeks ago had sustained a concussion and still had 57 stitches in his head. He still had the bandages on his head while he's watching the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach.
Man was truly built different.
How do we talk about him like not bombing U-boats, but we don't talk about this? This is fucking crazy.
It's insane. Not you.
He's a journalist. So, after D-Day, he ended up attaching himself to the 22nd Infantry Division as it pushed into France, which was one of the units that was on kind of the spearhead of the American advance into northern France. As they press into in late July, they're getting close to Paris. He comes across this little village outside of Paris, and the people there recognize him because he used to live in Paris. And so some of the older folks there are like, hey, that's Ernest. We know Ernest. We used to drink with him, and then he went off and became a big fancy writer. And so when he came into this town, they were like, hey, you've got some experience fighting in wars, right? And he's like, yeah, kind of, I guess, tangentially. And they're like, okay, you're in command of our militia now.
So he got conscripted?
He got conscripted into commanding a unit in the French resistance. And he took it, and he personally led and organized multiple raids on Nazi units in France.
That's insane.
This is what I was talking about. He did bomb Nazis. He just didn't bomb Nazi U-boats. Again, he is in his late 40s, or his mid-40s, has suffered a number of traumatizing wounds and illnesses that would have put most normal people in bed permanently for the rest of their lives.
I know I've said it already, and I'll keep on saying it, because it doesn't. You can't express how like built different he is, because like the amount of sheer fucking. If we lived in a world where Green Lanterns were real, this man would have gotten a reign.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh boy, let me tell you. So, this is an issue.
He would be a real life problematic Guy Gardner.
Yeah. This is an issue, though, him doing this, because the Geneva Conventions are a thing.
Ooh, yeah, he doesn't sound like someone who would follow the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Suggestion.
Here's the thing, technically he is doing a war crime, but it's not like a crime against humanity type of war crime, because he's just killing Nazi combatants, which is not in and of itself it's a crime. The crime, the actual international crime that he's violating, is the fact that he's not a combatant. He's a journalist, which is an explicitly protected class of non-combatant that you're not allowed to put in harm's way.
So what you're saying, the act of him being there constitutes a war crime?
The act of him actively fighting the Nazis.
makes the Nazis commit war crimes.
It's a violation of international law. He is violating an international law of war by being a non-combatant and actively taking part in combat. So the army finds out what he's doing, and they're like, "Oh, fuck, we can't do no, we can't put up with it." For one thing, he's violating the Geneva Conventions. For another thing, he's like a cultural staple in the American literary canon. He's by this point already one of those guys that is going to go down as one of the greatest people in the history of the human language, or the history of the English language. If he dies while violating international law under our watch, we are so fucked.
Yeah.
So they immediately arrest him and bring him up on charges. So yeah, the U.S. Army, they arrest Hemingway and they bring him up on charges of, violating the Geneva Convention. Why is this not more well-known part of his story? He ends up getting the charges dismissed because they can't actually prove that he was in combat. They don't have any evidence that he was in combat. All they have evidence of is that he gave advice to members of the French resistance, which is not in and of itself a crime. That is not because he's not actively participating as a combatant. So he does get away with it. But, so he's allowed to go back to the 22nd, but this time he's like, probably not going to be part of probably not going to be helping any more, resistance fighters with their killing Nazis thing now. This was actually a quote by basically like the officer who acted as his handler in France. Quote, Hemingway got into considerable trouble playing infantry captain to a group of resistance people that he gathered because a correspondent is not supposed to lead troops, even if he does it well.
That's always insane.
Yeah, he would continue to cover the war all the way through the end. He was present for the liberation of Paris. There's this popular myth that he was that when Paris was liberated, that he was the very first person to enter liberated Paris. That is not true. He was not the first. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who it was, but it was some U.S. Army unit. But yeah, he was not. He came in afterwards. But he was there for the liberation. And when he got there, he was able to reacquaint with some of his old friends that he used to, like some of the old writer friends that were still there and still living there, and had been under Nazi occupation for 5 years at this point. He ended up being present for the Battle of Hürtgen Forest, which was just a battle in Western Germany. And then he was also present for the Battle of the Bulge. Kind of.
Wow, okay. Kind of. How do you kind of be present for a battle?
He showed up to the Battle of the Bulge, and then his officer handler took one look at him and was like, "Oh, you are so sick you're about to die.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to get you to a hospital." And so he went to a hospital, and it turns out he had pneumonia.
That tracks.
He was suffering from pneumonia and still tried to... Do you know anything about the Battle of the Bulge?
Not that I remember directly correlated. Like, I'm sure I could probably take guesses.
Okay. It was in the middle of the woods in Belgium, which is a cold, wet part of Europe. In the middle of the coldest and snowiest winter in the last 200 years of European history.
To this day?
To this day.
Shit!
It was like negative 10 degrees outside, and everything was covered in snow. And he still, while actively having pneumonia, tried to go out and in bed with the army units fighting at the Battle of the Bulge at fucking Bastogne.
This man is truly built different.
So he would be sent to a hospital, he would recover from his pneumonia, and then he would, by the time he recovered, the war was over, he went back home to the U.S. Or he went back to Havana, actually. After the war, he would marry Mary Walsh, the lady that, the Times Magazine correspondent, and they would settle back down in Havana, and he sank deeper into his depression and alcoholism, which at this point was becoming so bad that it was stalling his writing.
Wow.
In 1948, he and Mary took an extended trip to Venice in Italy, where he began an affair with a 19-year-old Italian poet by the name of Adriana Ivancic. He was, 48. He was 49 years old, and she was 19.
That is disgusting.
This affair would inspire his next novel, which was called Across the River and Into the Trees, which was published in 1950. This is widely considered to be the worst piece of shit that he ever wrote. It was not a good book.
I was about to say, I hope it wasn't good.
It was not a good book. It got flooded with negative reviews. It did not sell well. And he became so fucking mad that it did so poorly that he channeled, for one thing, he was still drinking. He started drinking even more heavily, started being even more abusive to Mary, and then channeled all of that rage into knocking out his next novel in 8 weeks.
Damn.
That novel would be The Old Man and the Sea, which is a book about an elderly fisherman desperate to hunt down and catch a great merlin. A great old big, merlin like the fish.
That just sounds like a shitty version of Moby Dick.
Kind of. The fish is a metaphor for the old man's desperate attempt to recapture the energy and excitement of his youth.
That's what Moby Dick was.
Yeah, there's definitely some parallels. He's 54, or no, he's 51 when this is published, right after he's had an affair with a 19-year-old, and he's getting up there in age. He's starting to feel rickety, and he's writing a book about an old man trying to recapture the energy and vitality of his youth. This book is generally considered to be his second greatest work, right behind The Sun Also Rises. And this one actually won a Pulitzer. He actually got the Pulitzer for this one. It would also be the last work of fiction that he would ever publish. In 1953...
Okay. What was the general consensus on if it was a good book or not?
It's considered to be one of the greatest books he ever wrote.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah, it's considered like it's beloved. It's one of the great American classics. And God, that's the thing about Hemingway, is that all on his own, just from the outside looking in, he did so many things that just made him an absolute badass. Like, he was on his own merits, he was a badass. And then the way he behaved was just always a pathetic, self-absorbed, self-conscious man-child. Like, I'm not going to blame it on his mother, because blaming a woman for the shitty things that a man does is dumb and not good. But God, maybe if his mom had just said, I'm proud of you, just once.
If she wasn't such a cunt. Because it sounds like she was see you next Tuesday.
Yeah. She was not good. So in 1953, he and Mary would go on a trip to Africa. Just a sightseeing trip. He was gonna go there, basically do like an extended vacation, and then come home and write a bunch of stuff about it and publish it. In early 1954, while they're there, he and Mary were taking a sightseeing flight in Congo. The plane that they were in got too low and struck a utility pole, which caused the plane to crash. Mary suffered several broken ribs and would end up going into shock. And Ernest got a dislocated shoulder and a spine injury. They were forced to spend that night in the wilderness. And then the next morning, when the light came out, they saw a boat on the river that they were right next to, and they were able to hail it down, and they paid the guy on the boat to take them back to the city. And when they got back to the city, they chartered a flight because the city that they were in didn't have like a good hospital, so they were going to charter a flight to take them to Nairobi in Kenya, where there's a good hospital. As the plane was taking off, it hit a divot in the runway, and it flew off of the runway, flipped over, and crashed, and then caught fire. As the fire spread inside the plane, in order to get himself and his wife out, he smashed open a window with his skull, which gave him a, oh shit, yeah. Which unsurprisingly gave him a severe concussion. He suffered severe burns and a concussion on top of his spinal injury, which he had received the day before in the first plane crash. The following month, despite his injuries, he still, because he always loved to do shit while he was injured. Because if he just stopped his life every time he got injured, he'd never be able to get anything done. Because he was always fucking injured. So the following month, despite his injuries, he still tried to go out on a planned fishing trip with Mary and his son Patrick. While they were on the trip, a bushfire broke out. Just the brush around where they were at caught fire. And as they were trying to escape, the fire caught up to them, and he suffered second-degree burns across about 50% of his body. This was a month after surviving 2 plane crashes in 2 days. After this, he began drinking more in order to deal with the pain. By this point, he is suffering from high blood pressure and hypertension, the early stages of liver failure, and type 2 diabetes. So after... Oh yeah, his body is absolutely just falling apart. After the 2 plane crashes, a bunch of newspapers erroneously reported that he had been killed and started running obituaries. And then later on they were corrected, but all of the obituaries spooked the Nobel Prize Committee into being like, oh shit, he probably doesn't have very long to live. Let's get him a Nobel Prize real quick before he dies. And so in 1954, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature, which is, he talked for a long time about like wanting to get the Nobel Prize in Literature. That was kind of something that he'd always kind of wanted to get. But now that he had it, the way that he got it, which is basically like, they're afraid I'm about to die, he resented it. Yeah, it felt like a pity award, and he hated it. It pissed him off. Yeah. Yeah. In the late 1950s, he started working on several new projects. Basically, he had like three more books that he was getting ready to work on. Actually, three projects. Two of them were like regular length novels. One of the projects he was working on was a fully planned out trilogy that he was going to produce, that he was writing. It came out to he eventually did get most of the manuscript done and came out to about 200,000 words total. He would never get a chance to finish it. In 1959, he and Mary decided to leave Cuba because I don't know if you know anything about Cuba in the 1950s, but there's kind of a little bit of a civil war, and they were not exactly a safe place. Which they'd stuck it out. They stuck it out through the whole war, and the Civil War was over by this point. The previous U.S.-backed military dictator, Fulgencio Batista, he'd been overthrown, and now Fidel Castro is in charge. And Hemingway, being a Marxist, was like, cool, I like Castro. We can stay here. We can hang out. This is going to be good. We're going to live in like a good, like, communist country. This is great. This worked out great. I'm glad that he overthrew Batista. And then Castro announced, yeah, we're going to be seizing all property in Cuba and nationalizing all property in Cuba owned by foreign nationals, specifically Americans. And so all of a sudden, Cuba was very hostile towards Americans. And so he was like, probably not great if we stick around. We're probably about to lose our home at a minimum. And so they just up and left. And then the new Cuban government came in and took their villa and turned it into, I don't know, a collective farm or something. And so they found a nice little spot in Idaho, a nice little rural town, where they built a big nice house, and they settled down in Idaho. And Ernest began traveling back and forth to Spain. He will never leave Spain. He is forever tied to Spain. Specifically, he's tied to bullfighting for some reason. Because he's going to Spain on a couple projects, writing articles for Time magazine about bullfighting.
Well, okay.
But at this point in his life, he suffered a number of concussions and all other neurological conditions, and he's been drinking heavily for like the last 2 decades. He's losing the ability to organize his thoughts. And so he writes a lot of... he writes like 100,000 words about bullfighting, but none of it is coherent. And it has to be edited and like separately organized. He can't do it himself anymore. And so then on top of that, he's starting to suffer memory issues. His eyesight is failing. And he started to become paranoid that he was being spied on by the FBI.
He probably was being spied on by the FBI.
He used to be spied on the FBI. At this point, they don't really care. He's just a toddling old man writing articles for magazines.
Fair.
His physician in Idaho tried to convince him to get mental health treatment, but guys from that generation, they didn't believe in mental health. That shit's fake.
Nope.
So he was like, no, fuck no. What are you talking about? So instead, his doctor was like, hey, let's send you to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota where you can get treatment for your hypertension.
Sure, because that's going to fix him.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. His doctor lied to him. Once he got there and he was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, he was put into a psychiatric hold for several months and was subjected to 15 bouts of electroconvulsive therapy.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
After he was discharged and returned home, he suffered from such severe memory loss that he didn't remember the names of his own kids.
That sounds about right.
He couldn't write anymore.
That's what happens when you fuck someone up like that.
Whenever he tried to write, he just couldn't remember how to put words on the page. In April 1961, Mary found Hemingway in their kitchen holding the muzzle of a shotgun to his face. She grabbed the shotgun from him and called their doctor, that same doctor, back, and the doctor had Ernest admitted to the local hospital where he was subjected to 3 more rounds of electroconvulsive therapy.
Oh, good God. Like, this man needed more shocks to the head.
He was discharged in June of 1961. On July 2nd, 1961, Ernest Hemingway grabbed his break-action shotgun from his gun cabinet in his basement. He took it upstairs to the front entrance foyer. He stuck the muzzle into the roof of his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was 61 years old.
That's a hell of a story for a guy. Like, they hyped him up a little bit more than they should have on the clip of the comedian I saw with the puppet, but like, it's still a hell of an interesting story, and like it should be told more.
Hemingway is remembered today, like I said, as one of like the great authors in the canon of American literature, and he deserves it. His works are genuinely revolutionary and impactful, and they have inspired and informed writing styles in American literature ever since. And I think his story, it's the story of the man himself, is so informative about the type of, not just the type of person, but the environment that people find themselves in, where they become and have the opportunity to become the great artists of their times. Because he found himself at an intersection where he was exposed both to power and privilege and wealth, which he was able to have access to, while also finding himself very often amongst the dregs of society, amongst like the lowest denominators. And he found himself at that intersection and was able to use his developed and natural talent for expressing words on paper into stories that spoke to the experiences of the times that he lived in. And it also shows both the physical and like the psychological and emotional toll that plays on a person who finds themselves in those situations. And I think that's the most interesting part of his story, is how he ended up in the places that he did that allowed him to write the things that he did in the ways that he did.
I mean, he's a uniquely, like, his feats, like, there's no way to, like, obviously you can't recreate someone's life, but like, there's no way there's a scenario where someone who does equivalent feats to Hemingway ever exists again.
Yeah, he lived, his life was right on the dividing line between two completely different worlds. He lived in an era that was so utterly alien to everything that came before and after. We're never going to be able to, minds like his can exist, but we're never going to have the conditions that allow them to do the things that he did ever again, because it's so utterly unique. Such utterly unique times that he found himself in, and he was able to express those times in a way that will resonate with, as long as the English language persists, basically.
Yeah, for certain.
And I am genuinely shocked by how impactful his story has been. I was so scared going into the research for this that I was not going to be able to get much of an episode out of him.
And here we're sitting at like 2.5 hours recording.
2.5 hours. And I was so scared because in my mind for the longest time, he was just an author. I was going to be talking a lot about, yeah, he sat at his desk and he wrote some books and became famous off of it. And both him as a personality and the world around him was just so fascinating. I am actually genuinely thankful that you asked me to do Hemingway as a topic for an episode, because
I remember you were very hesitant to do it, and I think
yeah,
you exactly, you thought, why would I do it about an author? I don't think you had any of the context to be why this would be I started to probably poorly quote what I had seen, and you're like, you were genuinely confused. Like, are you sure you're talking about the right guy? It's like, you'll have to look into it and make sure. But yeah, it was quite good. It was a fun story to learn about too. It was
yeah, genuinely a fun story.
I was not ready for half of the stuff that happened, even with me knowing that there was a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Hemingway was a Chad, even though he was a drunk, abusive asshole to his wives.
He was a complicated man. I think we could say that for certain.
You got me there. But I don't have anything else. Where can they find you?
They can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The O is a 0. Tim, give them the good stuff.
So they can find me at Tim, aka Otis, on Blue Sky, and they can find the podcast at the Alexandria Society Pod on Facebook and Instagram, Alex Society Pod on Blue Sky, Alex Society Pod on Blue Sky, and Alexandria Society on TikTok. And if they've liked what they've listened to, they can give us a rate and review on their streaming platform choice, and we will see you next time.
Bye.